Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, President. I too rise today to speak in condolence of former West Australian Senator Philip Ross Lightfoot. The West Australian once noted that if Ross Lightfoot didn't exist, his opponents would be forced to invent him. And I think how true that was. Ross, I think it is safe to characterise as a genuine WA rogue with a big heart. However, he had very strong and often controversial opinions that few in the Senate today would find appropriate. But he did have long-standing passions for the monarchy, for the Federation, and very vocally for West Australian secession. In fact, I think it's still a sentiment that is held by more than a few West Australians. And he once referred to Western Australia that we should treat the Nullarbor as a big dry moat to promote secession. He was a country boy at heart, and he'd always say that he was far more comfortable in moleskins and his R.M. Williams than a pinstripe suit. But that said, he did become a very successful pastoralist and farmer, and as we've heard from Senator Birmingham, a long-standing and three-time politician. But he was born in South Australia in 1936, and in his life he did turn himself to many endeavours, including in the 1950s international service, as a plasterer, a jackaroo, a mounted police officer, when he served as part of the Queen's escort on her royal visit. And after 1963, he began a long involvement with the mining industry and moved to Western Australia in 1968. And it was during the first nickel boom. His story of working as a prospector is what outback legends are made of. His innovative work of pegging the entire town of Coolgardie, after learning that most of the land in the goldfields had already been pegged, certainly led to his future financial fortune. In his own words, he said, "They like to put me in amongst the Silvertails, but they can't because I'm a peasant. That's what I am. I'm a peasant who has had his share of luck." Ross had the almost unique distinction of serving Western Australia in three separate jurisdictions: the WA Legislative Assembly, the Legislative Council, and also the Senate. So he's one of the few of us who've actually been able to deliver three separate first speeches and valedictory speeches. Having joined the Liberal Party in 1957, he contested what was then to be the very safe ALP seat of Kalgoorlie in 1983, and his intent was to divert some of the Labor resources from the marginal seat of Murchison Eyre. And it was to be the only time he lost an election. In 1984, Ross was pre-selected to contest Murchison Eyre in succession to the late Peter Coyne, who had held it since 1971. It was the largest district in area with the smallest enrolment of around 3,000, and it included Meekatharra, Mount Magnet and Leonora. In 1986, he won the seat, polling 1,411 votes, with 51.7% of the vote. And in 1991, he relocated to Perth because he had a farm in Bindoon. And it was then he was pre-selected for the fourth position on the Liberal ticket, and he was elected for the North Metropolitan Regional in the Legislative Council. And then, sadly, for many of us who remember, the late Senator John Panizza passed away in January of 1997, and somewhat unexpectedly. And Ross, still an MLC, was one of the many Liberal applicants for the casual Senate vacancy, which expired in 2002. In May 1997, he was chosen to represent Western Australia in replacement of Senator John Panizza. However, as he describes it, with Western Australia still at the forefront of his focus, he delayed his swearing into the Senate to stay in Western Australia as an MLC to ensure the court government's IR reforms were passed. And the history of Western Australia shows, thank goodness, he did that. And as he noted at the time, he said, "My duty is to Western Australia, whether as a senator or in the micro-senate of the Legislative Council." And as Senator Birmingham has so well characterised, during his 11 years in the Senate, he formed a strong interest in defence, foreign affairs, federalism, and he also championed the constitutional monarchy. He also served on a number of important committees, and including as acting Deputy President of the Senate. Ross was always a fierce advocate for Western Australia, and he said this in his inaugural speech in the WA Legislative Assembly. He said, "So my goal as I see it, Mr Speaker, my charge and my responsibility to the people of Murchison Eyre and my fellow goldfielders is to act as a watchdog, a guardian against the further atrophying and shrinking of Western Australian rights by insidious and often covert or duplicitous legislation from Canberra, like amendments to the Taxation Act, the Heritage Acts, native land rights, and the most vexatious of all, the misnomer called the Bill of Rights." It sounds like a week in the Senate today. In fact, I feel that I'm further charged with, went on to say, I feel that I'm further charged with attempting to hold the scales more evenly to regain from Canberra some of the decision-making and equity that most of my constituents agree is rightfully within the realms of Western Australia, the largest state of this federated nation. But by the end of his time in the Senate in 2008, Ross acknowledged the softening of his views as a secessionist, and in his valedictory speech he said, "The other aspect of that which I brought to this chamber was that I still burned, albeit not with the same fierce passion that I once held, for the secession of Western Australia. It seemed to me to be something that was not quite fair, not quite reasonable, and not quite equitable to have a big state like Western Australia, a third of this nation, producing a great deal of the national export income, and to have that income flow mainly to Canberra and seemingly not to flow back to Western Australia." And part of that change was his recognition of the Senate itself's evolution. Ross's ambition had always been to serve Western Australia exclusively, demonstrated by his 18 years of parliamentary service. But as he acknowledged in his valedictory speech, he served his country as well. So I, on behalf of myself and I'm sure other Western Australian Liberal Party members, I extend my sincere condolences to his family, and I remember his remarkable service to Western Australia and to his country. Vale Ross Lightfoot.